Hey, good morning everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Have a really beautiful morning happening here. Temperature in the mid 70s. Fast moving trade winds high above me. Some intermittent showers rolling through, and enough sunshine to keep everything very well topped off. So I was going to talk to you guys today about the considerations for buying raw land in a rural area, regardless of where you are. I've done that now in two very different locations in my life, and I find the considerations to be much the same. So I'm thinking that might apply to you guys that are really thinking about doing this type of a thing, and hopefully some of the things I mentioned will help you live your dream. So when I first moved off grid up in the Colorado mountains, the only thing that I knew for sure was what mountain range I wanted to live in. Other than that, exactly where I wasn't quite sure. I knew what kind of money I had to work with, which at the time was $5,000. So I had to stay within that budget, and land was fairly reasonable back then, where you could still pick up a few acres for that kind of money. So that was the first consideration, was I knew exactly what kind of money I had to work with. So I knew somebody who sold real estate down in that area, and told them what I was looking for and what I wanted to do. They knew the area very well. They took me out, showed me lots of different properties within my price range. And although I loved everything I looked at, nothing quite said, yeah, this is it. And then after a couple of different trips down there and hiking all around and seeing how the lay of the land was down there, I stepped onto the property that I eventually bought, and within seconds I knew that I was done looking. And up there at that elevation, about 8,300 feet, the considerations I was looking for was extreme wilderness, which it was, and nobody around, which there wasn't, and just the absolute silence and only the sounds of nature. That was the main considerations that I was thinking about then. I wanted to go into where I didn't hear the sounds of people, and I just wanted to hear the sounds of wilderness. So it checked off all of those boxes. It was a little rough getting in there, which I liked that as well. Four-wheel drive almost on a good day with any type of inclement weather. Definitely four-wheel drive in and out, and I was just absolutely fine with that. And at the time, the nearest neighbor that was living out there full-time, there was one within a mile, or right at about a mile, and then after that it was 3 miles away. So that was what I was really looking for. And that was 7.5 acres, and the asking price was $5,000, and I offered them $4,500, and they took it, and I was in. And after I purchased the property, I used to just go down there and camp out every weekend. I had a small business up in the city, about 3 hours away. And pretty much every weekend or every other weekend, I'd run down there and just camp with a tent out on the land and just kind of get the feel of it. Hiked around everywhere. It wasn't far to where it backed up to BLM land, thousands and thousands of just acres of wilderness, and I just loved it, so I just camped out there in a tent as often as I could. I eventually bought a small little travel trailer and had it hauled out there, and then I could go and stay longer periods of time. I started, since I did have my own business, I could take longer weekends and longer weekends, and I started running down there on Thursday nights and staying till Sunday night. Then sometimes I would even take longer breaks. And so that went on for a couple of years. And I just kept falling more and more in love with the place. I hadn't really formulated that I was going to live 100% off the grid down there, but I loved having it just as a little getaway to get out of the city, take a break from the working routine at the rate that I was doing up in the city. And then one October, I went down there and I spent 10 days in that little trailer that I had put up in there. It was a little 18 or 19 foot travel trailer. I got a good deal on it, you know, one of the self-contained ones, so I just hauled down what I needed. And it was like a little teeny house, is how I looked at it. Anyway, for that 10 days, I totally decompressed from the city pace, did nothing but read books and take hikes with my dog. And I decided right then and there, after having the property for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, I want to say now, I forget exactly how long. And I knew that I was going to go back to the city, put my house up for sale, and I was going to move down there and live in the wilderness full time. So yeah, after that 10-day stretch and then going down there for a couple of years, I decided that I could live just like I was living for those 10 days down there, that was enough for me, and I would be very happy to do just that. But I knew I wanted to go down and build my own cabin. Now, when I say about living off grid, I mean I knew it would be off grid because there was no grid anywhere near that area. But I wasn't thinking about power at that point. I was nourished enough just by the quiet. And I mean so quiet you could hear your ears ring. That's really what got to me, was just that quiet. I'd never spent fully 10 days with no distractions and no noise, no man-made noise whatsoever. And I just tuned into all the sounds of nature. And then I realized that that's what I'd been looking for a very long time. So yeah, then I did build my own little cabin and lived out there for many, many years, living the dream. Then fast forward about 20 years later, when I finally decided I couldn't deal with living at that elevation and the harsh winters in that location. And I knew where I was going to come. It had to be quiet. Where you can just hear the wind in the trees. And that's it. So back to some of the considerations about choosing a place off-grid. You're not the first one back into any place you go to, no matter how far back in you go. And I thought I'd gone about as far into the wilderness as a person could go. But there were still people that came out there on a seasonal nature. So there were some seasonal cabins tucked way up in those hills. People didn't winter over. No one was wintering over as far back as I was when I started wintering over or just living there full time. A lot of them would just come in for the summer. There was a lot of trapping and illegal poaching going on during those spring and summer months. And those people were very aware that I was out there, and I was very aware that they were out there. So that's one of the things that's similar out here. I mean, when I first moved out here, there was only a few people living year-round on this road, this 1 mile stretch of road that I'm on, and guaranteed they knew the day that I rolled in. So regardless of how rural of an area you go into, people are going to know you're there, and they might not come right up and introduce themselves to you, but they know you're there. And up in the mountains, it was a long time before I ever had somebody come down to see what I was doing. I mean, when you're out there hammering in the wilderness, those sounds go for miles. And the longer you're in a very quiet location, your hearing gets attuned to nature, and you can tell the minute you start hearing somebody being near you, even if that is miles away. You become very aware of that. And then over the years, as more people did start to buy land back in there, it didn't grow exponentially the whole time I was there, but you know, every spring and summer you could hear different kinds of activity. And then when it would get quiet, like everybody else out there, you take a hike down that way and see what's happening as the sounds of encroachment become nearer to you. And one of the things that I saw that was really common in the mountains was, as soon as somebody bought a piece of land out in that area, the first thing they would do is go around and tack up no trespassing signs all around the borders of their property. And for those of us that lived back in there, we always thought kind of how ridiculous that was. We already knew they were there. There was no like trespassing going on in that rural of an area. And they didn't know it at the time, but all they were doing was advertising that they were there, even though just by their sounds, everybody would know that they're there. And people would, like I say, obviously go down and see what's coming, what type of a neighbor is this going to be. And sometimes people would go in and actually clear cut their property for maybe a better mountain view off in the distance or something like that. And that would rub all the locals the wrong way. If you came in and within a month of purchasing your property, the first thing you do is bulldoze everything that is on that property down to nothing, it would interrupt all of the migration of the game. I mean, if you had spent any time back in there, you would become aware of where all the game trails were and the migration of the game that would just come through there every single day. Bear, mountain lion, deer, elk, bobcats, coyotes, you just name it, they use those game trails. And if you could just sit off in the distance and watch you know, a game trail for a while, you would be amazed at how much activity you would see there. So when people would come in and disrupt the land radically, it would change the entire way that the wildlife, I mean, the wildlife would always adapt and start making game trails further away from that kind of activity, but it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. There were old mountain people up there that, you know, had been up in there for generations, not making much of an impact on the environment and the land, living very, very simply. They might have poached a deer here and there to just sustain themselves food-wise. Nobody really cared about that. But like I said, there was some bigger operations, bigger fur trades and things like that going on that and I did have problems with those people from time to time. But so yeah, a lot of that takes a long time before you start becoming aware of what's really going on for miles and miles around you. So, and the same thing I see out here, like I said when I first moved out here, there's very few people living on this road. It was one of the things that really appealed to me. There's been the biggest jump in growth out here just in the past few years. It really, I think, came about during the pandemic. A lot of people started bugging out from different places, wanting to get to a more rural place. Hawaii, of course, has great weather most of the time. And I see the same type of things where it's happened on this road a few times in the past few years. Somebody comes in new. Everybody on this road knew the day they landed, and the first thing they do is line their property with no trespassing signs and things of that nature, when no one was walking through that land ever. So right away, the way they come into an area like that, they start to give off an impression that is not always welcomed by the locals. So I'll tell you a real quick couple of stories. Once up in the mountains, a new guy who rolled in, clear-cut his property, and within just a couple of months being out there, started making the rounds out there to everybody. And he started with me, and he said, "We need a homeowners association out here, and I want you to sign this petition. I'm going to start the homeowners association. I'm going to be the president of it." And I was like, whoa, buddy, you better be careful about going up to some of the people out here saying that. We're in one of the last subdivisions left in the lower 48 states that doesn't have a homeowners association or a mandate or rule book on how to live. And the ones that made it out to here were here largely because of that. And no one cares what kind of a home you develop or live in, and that's why they're here. One guy might choose to live in nothing more than a chicken coop, and that was fine by most of us, but he didn't want that. He wanted to come in there and change everything, and within a couple of years, after being very disappointed on how that was received, he was gone. And then I just recently had a very similar experience happen out here. I was heading into town one day. The road was blocked on my way in to town, and a new person had clear-cut their property, bulldozed every living thing on his acreage to where not one thing was living on there anymore. And he stopped me, or I was stopped because of his equipment on the road, and he came up and told me, introduced himself and said that we need to get these roads changed out here. So yeah, as I've mentioned before, it takes me about 30 minutes to get out of this subdivision, and that's only going 2 miles because of the condition of the roads. But it's because of those conditions of the roads that this area is not overly populated. There are subdivisions above me and below me that have paved roads, and almost every single lot has been developed. And the reason I did choose to be out here, as well as many others, was because it is still mostly country, and if the roads were to be paved, that would change overnight. So again, that guy's going to run into a lot of opposition if he thinks he's going to blow into an area and change it overnight. And the thing that I don't understand, and is kind of the point of this whole video, is if that's what you want, if you need a big thick rule book on how to live, and you want it to be the same for everybody else, there are subdivisions aplenty like that out there. But again, I'm in another last holdout of places where that is not happening, and I hope I can live out the rest of my life and not see that happen. I don't need a big thick rule book telling me how to live or what to do. And yeah, so those are considerations. Yeah, don't I say follow your dream into the rural areas if you want to live off grid and go rural. But be aware of where you're going and what it's like. And don't think you're going to make any vast changes. And if you need something that's like that, maybe look elsewhere, would be my recommendation. Yeah, don't let your dream become your neighbor's nightmare. Yeah, and those people never last. You know, precious few places left in this country that you don't have to follow the rules. Crazy rules. Nope, not interested. So yeah, remember why you went to where you wanted to live your dream, and realize that that same dream is shared by a lot of other people in these areas. And eventually, if you come in like that, you'll find great support in rural areas. Like, I don't see my neighbors out here very often. In fact, it's very rare. And it was the same in the mountains. Even more rare up there because there was just fewer people per square mile. Out here, there are definitely more people. You do hear the sounds of people more out here because there are just simply more people. But yeah, take into consideration how you're going to settle into your environment. Rural people will always have your back in an emergency situation, is what I found. And in both places, I've dealt with emergencies, and you always knew you could count on your neighbors. So you want to have it like that, because in both places, 911 wasn't going to get to you in time for anything. Any kind of an emergency you might need, you're going to need to maybe rely on somebody. So that's the top consideration. You know, go in with respect for the area that attracted you to it in the first place, and realize that everybody, when you move into a rural situation, everybody wants to be the last person in, but you're not going to be. There's going to be more that come, and if someone comes and builds on the lot right next door to you, your hope would be that they come in with that mindset of as little impact on the environment as possible, because that's what draws most of us to these areas. Is you get out and you see how it's still largely unspoiled, regardless of where you are. And if you're going into an area like that, which is the dream of many people going off grid, then it's your duty, I would say, to live like that as well. The people that I saw in the mountains, and I can think of a few who came out and made a very big splash, did a lot of things that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and their dream fizzled out within a few years of them being there. And then their place would be on the market within 5 years. Used to see a great deal of that, or not a great deal, but I mean a fair enough amount of that going on to where we would see how someone would land in one of those areas and say, they won't be here in 5 years. You could just tell. And they wouldn't be. And you see a little of that out here as well. You know, these isolated areas, you have to take that into consideration. You really do. That's my words of wisdom for today. Go ahead, live your dream, do it. I couldn't think of living any other way right now. And it's a great way to live. And the normal sounds that you're going to make while you're out there setting up your homestead and doing whatever, I mean, everybody understands that. I mean, you're going to come in, you're going to set your place up. It's going to take a little bit of work, and eventually you'll just be part of the neighborhood, no matter how big or widespread your neighborhood is. And then when you start to meet some people, you're going to find out that you have a lot in common with those people wherever you settle down, because yeah, they were probably drawn to much of what drew you to that area. So yeah, don't be one of the people that comes out, disrupts the entire environment in many different ways, and then you put your place up for sale in just a few years because it really wasn't what you thought it was going to be. So yeah, right? That's right. All right, guys, just a Saturday chat. Aloha, everybody. Blacking. You're making a lot of noise. Come on, buddy. Come on. That's right. That's a good boy.